And so rehab started on such a simple level that it almost didn't make sense to me. And the first thing that it started with was a simple ice cube. And so what they did is they gave me an ice cube because they wanted to see if I could swallow. And they wanted to see if when I swallowed it, if any of the liquids were going down into my lungs. And so they gave me this first ice cube. And honestly, I cannot tell you how amazing this ice cube was. Just try to imagine going almost a full month of never having any food touch your mouth, never have any water, any other kind of liquid, and not to mention not even really any air because I wasn't breathing on my own. And so to go that long with nothing touching your mouth and to get some water, some cold moisture in my mouth, when that ice cube started melting, running around my tongue, and eventually when I swallowed it, it ran down my throat, that was honestly, hands down, the best sensation I've ever had in my entire life. It was absolutely amazing. And so I wanted every ice cube I could get my hands on. You know, it was one after another. But so what they were doing to test to make sure I was swallowing right, because I had this trach in my throat, they had the ability to take a tube and shove it down the rest of my throat and go into my lungs and suction out. And they would do that not only to help me because I wasn't able to cough and things like that to clear my throat and clear my lungs, but they were doing it to see if there's any water. And unfortunately, there was water. And so they had to take that ice cube away. I was pretty mad at everybody that took the ice cube away. Because at this moment in my life, that ice cube was my entire life. That ice cube was the only thing I cared about, the only thing that mattered, the only thing that brought me any kind of pleasure. And so when they took that away, it was like they took everything in my life. And try to think about that. Think about everything you have going on in your lives right now. You've got school, sports, friends, family, and everything in between. Erase every single bit of that and think about an ice cube being your entire life. It's pretty strange to have something so simple mean everything to me. But eventually, you know, we worked on my throat, and what had happened is I had simply forgotten how to swallow. I had no idea. None of us have ever had to learn how to swallow. And so it's a challenging thing to try to figure out how to do. So started working on, you know, using my neck muscles, swallowing without any liquids to try to get that connection of how everything needs to flow right so that I don't swallow into my lungs. And eventually they gave me back another ice cube. Another extremely happy moment in my life. That was a step forward. I got this ice cube and I let it melt and I swallowed it down and luckily, you know, nothing went into my lungs. I had learned how to swallow again. So that was my first step to becoming myself again. From there, it was learning how to actually take in food. So for example, the first thing they gave me was applesauce and they put blue dye in it. They put the blue dye in so that when they suction out of my lungs, they'd be able to see if there's any blue dye in my lungs. So I got the applesauce and swallowed that down. Everything went great. It was awesome to have flavor in my mouth for the first time. But you know, we did that test and everything went really well. And that's when they were like, hey, you get to eat your first meal. You know, we want to see if you're able to actually take in some food. So of course I'm thinking, okay, I live in Montana, and you know, we have access to local farmers, organic food, everything out here is great. Well, that wasn't the case at all. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had hospital food, but it is not really even food. And then not to mention, for me, they weren't giving me solid food. And so the first thing they gave me was a burger. And of course they had to blend up this burger and they pureed it and everything and brought it over to me. And when it came, it didn't smell like a burger, and most importantly, it most certainly did not look like a burger. In fact, the only way I've been able to describe what this looked like, blended up, was it looked like something that your dog leaves for you in the yard. And that's what I had to eat. Not one part of me wanted to put this in my mouth, not one part. But I knew I had to because I had to prove to the nurses and doctors and therapists that I could do this so that I could move on to the next step. So I ate this burger, and like I said, it's pureed. But you know how it is, like if you eat pudding, you kind of still have to chew, even though you could just swallow it down, you still need to move it around in your mouth. So I'm chewing it, and I swallow it down, and I had about 3 or 4 bites. And I was so physically exhausted from 3 or 4 bites of food that I ended up having to take a 2 or 3 hour nap. It honestly felt like I just ran a marathon to eat 3 or 4 bites of food that was pureed. And the reason is I didn't speak for over a month. I didn't eat. I didn't do anything with the muscles in my mouth. And so that process went on. I'd wake up, I'd eat 3 or 4 bites. I'd be so exhausted I'd fall back asleep for hours. Eventually 3 or 4 bites turned into 10 bites, which turned into 20 bites, which turned into a whole meal. And once I had that down and they knew I could eat the proper amount of food, that's when I was able to transition to my next step of therapy. And so part of that was getting on a life flight jet and fly back to Minnesota because I needed to be close to my family, friends, support, and that's where I was going to finish out rehab.